As political parties continue to race against time to meet the coalition talks deadline, there are concerns over the impact of ideological differences for a proposed government of national unity. The Economic Freedom Fighters has rejected the ANC's proposal, refusing to work with the DA and Freedom Front Plus, describing them as counter-revolutionary. Now, to help us understand whether political parties can put their differences aside, I'm joined by political analyst Sanusha Naidu. Sanusha, very good to speak to you. It's been some time. The issue around the proposed GNU, the ANC seems to have come up with a plan that they think would be beneficial for the country. Is it about the country? Is it about the ANC? Is it about specific political parties?
Good day, Hugo. Good day to your viewers. I think it really has to be about the country. I mean, the idea of the development framing of a GNU, as the president said in his closing remarks on Thursday evening, is about how do you actually take what has been the outcome of this election and effect it into a kind of working governing arrangement with regard to the fact that none of the political parties that have if you look at the election results, none of the political parties have got a mandate to rule with a majority. And I think that in itself tells you that people in South Africa, or the electorate in South Africa, just over 16 million people that voted, are saying to the political parties, you have to find a working relationship. And so ideology is important, but I don't think it's the overriding factor that should determine what the discussion, what the engagement on negotiation should be like. I mean, there's a sense here that when you go into your election mode campaigning, you use your ideology in a way that shows that you're going to bring benefits if you are elected into some kind of government, some kind of architecture of the state, whether it's in parliament or whether it's in the cabinet. And so you should stick to that, because that in itself, your election campaigning manifesto as well as your election campaign is based on a lot of transactional promises, things like we'll double the social wage, the welfare grant, we'll create this, we'll do that, there's a lot of transactional issues. And so when you think about ideology has to talk to that, what you have promised. Mm-hmm. So if you go in there and you say, we're going to do this, this, and this, or we're not going to even go in to talk because we're not on the same political spectrum when it comes to the ideological space, then I think it actually kind of ends up in a very difficult situation, because people have voted for you and they do expect you to be there as part of these discussions.
I'd like us to draw parallels, or certainly for you to draw parallels to the GNU of 1994, because this is not our first experience with the GNU. It's not our first experience where parties that went into a GNU had differing ideologies. What sort of parallels can we draw between the two situations we find ourselves in?
Well, I think firstly, Hugo, you got to remember 1994 was a different construct in terms of the political landscape, in terms of structural conditions, economic conditions. I mean, I think 1994 was really about how do you find that relationship of working together. Not many people actually see the GNU in 1994 as one that played a constructive role in the reconciliation or the transformation of the state, particularly along the economic lines. There were lots of debates. If you were in CODESA 1 or following CODESA 1, CODESA 2, the debates that we now seem to be circling back to with regard to the Reserve Bank, etc., were big debates then. But I think the GNU of 1994 was at that time based on what domestic conditions were. Some people disagree with the fact that there should have been these levels of concession, I think, around issues like the Sunset Clause, which was really a very important a clause that was developed by Joe Slovo, and it kind of broke the deadlock with regard to the protection of the civil service at the time within the state, which were really civil servants that were under the nationalist government, and there was a need to protect them in terms of their interests, both in their pension funds and so forth. And I think that became a bit of a sticky point. I think the GNU today comes on the back of the fact that the election has shown that there's no one single majority party. In 1994, it was a lead up to an election, and I think those were the dynamics that we need to think about now. Also, externally, globally, the world was very different in 1990. We saw the end of the Cold War. We saw this kind of triumphalism coming out about capitalism, the liberal economic order. Today, those things are in a state of flux. In the period since then, we've had a lot of economic turmoil in global markets. And so we're not at that point where we should be talking about, it's going to be a GNU of 1994. No, it's not. It's going to be based on what structural conditions are now. And the domestic conditions are much more acute than it was. I'm not saying it wasn't then, but much more acute now, because there's a generation here that actually haven't been born in the liberation struggle architecture. They've been born post-liberation. And so their loyalty or their kind of understanding of where they want to be is not about, harking back to the past. It's about here and now. So I think those are the dynamics that also inform what the negotiations should look like in terms of a GNU based on current structural conditions.
Now, just how realistic is the ANC's proposal to co-govern with every political party in the National Assembly?
I mean, I think it's theoretically a space that they feel that they need to put out that kind of message that they are willing to speak to every political party, because I think they also realize that as much as you get the sense from saying that we still 40%, we still garnered 40%, and that's almost like we kind of got a majority, a kind of juxtaposition of how they see it. But I think they feel that this is one way that they could actually open up and be that kind of party that can discuss with everyone. The problem with that is that not everybody will be able to see you as that actor that will kind of shape this, and we've already seen that, with the way the EFF has come out and said that, they're not desperate to be in the GNU. There are other parties now that have written to the Chief Justice as part of a 7 parties or thereabouts, who have written to the Chief Justice of the Constitutional Court saying that they want an urgent meeting on the GNU, because you can't, according to the letter, you can't let one party define this GNU or even be the kind of lead negotiator or parties need to come to them. In fact, it should be much more collaborative, cooperative, and much more interactive in terms of having that level playing field. So it's kind of at this point where I think, as the question is, the ANC has 40%. So in a way, they have to be in some of these discussions, if not most of these discussions. The other parties, like the MK, which we're not sure where they are now, they kind of, saying that they will talk with the ANC, but we're not sure what the conditions are for them right now. Have they moved away from some of their, red lines of their conditions of how they will talk with the ANC? I mean, they got 14%. The DA, for example, has got over 21%. So these are and of course, don't forget the EFF. And the IFP. So these are the parties that I think they are going to talk to each other, but I think it's not going to be about who dominates the conversation. So from a theoretical perspective, I think the ANC has put out something very important for themselves to show that they are magnanimous in this whole thing. But at the same time, I think other political parties are saying, well, you're not going to dominate this. This is not about you coming in because you got 40%. So I think there's going to be a lot of internal discussions on ironing out not just the ideological issues, but ironing out other issues as well in terms of the kinds of agreements that they're going to have with this governing arrangement, and also how do they look at cabinet and parliament and where some of the traction will lie.
Well, if we try and unpack this and look at it both from a practical perspective and also a legal perspective, Sanusha, should the smaller parties that have the 1 seat, the 2 seats, and maybe a couple more have as much say as those that have 40 seats, 80 seats, or double that number?
It's a difficult one, Hugo, because when you talk about that kind of approach to a multi-party democracy, and because it's built on this PR system, obviously the PR system is supposed to be theoretically about power sharing. And so power sharing would actually be about not necessarily only the ones that have a greater number of seats or the greater number of the percentage after the election, but rather about that a kind of cooperative collaboration, very much like what we see in terms of a body corp of sort. But, the problem here is that we look at elections and we look at election results in a very linear way. It's about who has the highest amount of who gets the highest amount of the votes, the percentage and the seats, and they should actually be the more dominant actors. That mean, and in this case, I don't think that it's about the dominance of one party. It's about actually talking about what is the mandate to go forward to govern, and more importantly, the fact that we have serious socio-economic conditions, just like what your insert was talking about and highlighting around water issues. And these are real life scenarios, people who are living in real life poverty. And so it's not about who you talk to or why you talk to them, or do ideological lines bar you from talking to them, but rather about putting people first. And that's what it's about. And that's what democracy is supposed to be about. But I think sometimes we get confused with the idea that if we get the mandate, then we can actually, political parties then, there's a bit of a infraction between how they want to go forward. They become much more tenuous in their relationship. So the 3-2-1 parties, I mean, even the parties that got 5 seats, whatever. I mean, everybody is part of this landscape. There was a certain section of the population that voted for them. That's why they got 2 seats. That's why they got 3 seats. But again, the question is, it's not about how do you assert your authority, it's how do you actually negotiate your mandate that you've been given.
Final question. I know we have to let you go shortly, Sanusha. What happens if we have a standoff? So the GNU has been offered to all political, in fact, all political parties have been invited to the GNU. From what we understand, the DA and the IFP have said that they're ready to start some form of conversations or discussions towards the GNU. And if the other parties are otherwise inclined, if we have a standoff, what would a standoff look like? How can it be resolved?
I think for now, Hugo, let's just see what happens. There's too much of speculation of what is not going to happen, what is going to happen. And I think right now we don't know. I mean, we're getting a lot of information in the public domain. We're hearing a lot of things. There was a lot of interesting reports yesterday that maybe the DA and the IFP are not going into it. I mean, there's lots of conflicting reports. For now, I think whatever you talk about in terms of a standoff, the parties don't have the luxury of time. They don't have the space to say that we need to do this and this. And it's really their, if there's a standoff, it's their culpability in all of this for actually not being mature, not being much more than what they say they are, and actually being about the South African state and the republic, the democracy, and most importantly, the people. So if there's a standoff, I think that they have to take responsibility for why that standoff is. I don't want to speculate that there will be a standoff. Let's give this a much more positive energy than the kind of negativity we've seen thus far. But I think what's more important as well is the responsibility now of political parties are to be adults in the room.
Well, I hope they can achieve that. Political analyst Sanusha Naidu, appreciate your time, as always, unpacking for us the landscape of the GNU and how it is likely to unfold.